60 hours. That's how long Harrison Okene sat alone in complete darkness at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. No light, no food, water all around him, and every single one of his crewmates dead. When rescue divers finally reached the sunken ship, they weren't going down there to save anyone. They were going down to recover bodies. As far as anyone on the surface knew, there were no survivors. There couldn't be. The ship had been sitting on the ocean floor for nearly 3 days. But then, something moved in the dark. This is not a movie. This is not a dramatization. This is the real, documented story of a man who survived something that, by every reasonable measure, should have killed him. And what kept him alive wasn't special training, it wasn't expensive gear. It was a decision he made in the first few minutes, in total darkness, when panic would have been the easiest thing in the world to choose. Stay with me, because this story is worth every second of your time.
Harrison Okene was 29 years old in May of 2013. He wasn't a Navy SEAL. He wasn't a trained diver. He wasn't someone who had ever prepared for what was about to happen to him. He was a cook, a ship's cook aboard a tugboat called the Sunken, operated by a company called West African Ventures off the coast of Nigeria. His job was straightforward: feed the crew, keep the kitchen running, do his shift. The Sunken was out on a routine operation, helping stabilize an oil platform in the Bight of Benin, a stretch of the Atlantic Ocean along the west coast of Africa. It was the kind of work the crew had done before. 12 men on board, a vessel they knew well, a job that was supposed to be unremarkable. That morning, Harrison had spoken to his wife. Nothing about the day suggested it would be his last as a free man on the surface of the earth. He was just doing his job, on a normal ship, on a normal day. That's the part that matters, because what happened next didn't happen to a hero prepared for disaster. It happened to an ordinary man who had about 60 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether he lived or died.
It was around 4:30 in the morning, on May 26, 2013. Most of the crew was asleep. Harrison had gotten up to use the bathroom, one of those small, mundane moments that, on this particular night, separated him from everyone else on board. Then, the ship moved. The Sunken was struck by a powerful wave surge. The Atlantic in that region is not forgiving, and in the early morning darkness, the tugboat was hit hard enough to capsize. It didn't happen slowly. The ship rolled, and it went down fast, sinking to approximately 30 meters, around 100 feet below the surface. In those first moments, Harrison was thrown through the ship as it turned. Water was flooding in from every direction. He couldn't see anything. He didn't know which way was up. He moved, instinctively, desperately, through compartments that were already filling with cold seawater. He ended up in the officer's mess, a small room toward the front of the vessel, and in that room, pressed against the ceiling of the now upside-down ship, there was air, a pocket of trapped air, roughly the size of a small bathroom. He pressed his face into it, and he breathed. The other 11 crew members did not find an air pocket. According to the official rescue records and reports, all 11 of Harrison's crewmates died in the sinking. Some were found by the divers when they eventually descended. Harrison was alone, 30 meters down, pitch black. No way to know if anyone was looking for him. No way to know if anyone even knew he was still alive.
Let's be clear about what this environment actually was, because the details matter. The water surrounding Harrison inside that ship was cold. The Bight of Benin sits in tropical waters, but at 30 meters depth, cold Atlantic currents made conditions brutal on the body over time. Prolonged exposure to cold water drains body heat in ways that are not immediately obvious. It's a slow, creeping danger. There was zero light, not dim light, not occasional light, complete, total darkness for the entire duration. The ship's hull around him groaned under water pressure. The sounds, by Harrison's own account in interviews he gave after his rescue, were constant and disorienting. In terms of supplies, he had almost nothing. He found 2 cans of Coca-Cola. That was it. no food. The cola became his only source of hydration and calories across nearly 3 days. The air pocket itself was also not a stable, unlimited resource. As he breathed, carbon dioxide built up. The water level inside his pocket shifted with changes in pressure and tidal movement, sometimes rising, sometimes dropping slightly. Every change was a threat. Too much CO2 in a sealed space causes dizziness, confusion, and eventually loss of consciousness. Harrison later said in documented interviews that he prayed, that he believed he was going to die, that at certain points he made peace with that possibility. He stayed in that pocket for approximately 60 hours.
Here's where it's important to understand something. Harrison Okene survived not because of luck alone, but because of specific behaviors, some instinctive, some deliberate, that aligned with documented survival principles. First, he stayed still. He did not thrash. He did not attempt to swim blindly through the flooded, pitch-black corridors of the ship toward the surface 30 meters above. In an enclosed survival space with limited air, unnecessary physical movement accelerates oxygen consumption and CO2 buildup. Stillness was not passivity. It was the right call. Second, he got out of the water. Harrison found life jackets and used them to keep his body elevated, reducing direct contact with the cold water. This was critical. Keeping his body temperature from dropping too fast extended the window in which he could remain conscious and functional. Third, he rationed what little he had. 2 cans of Coca-Cola over 60 hours is not comfortable, but drinking them slowly rather than immediately was the right instinct. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, he did not attempt to self-rescue by swimming out. At 30 meters depth, in total darkness with no diving equipment, attempting to swim to the surface would have almost certainly resulted in a fatal embolism or simple disorientation and drowning. He stayed put. He waited. These decisions, made by a man with no formal survival training, were correct.
This story also has a harder side to look at. The JASCON 4's emergency systems did not result in an effective, immediate distress signal. The delay in locating the vessel and confirming the situation meant that hours passed before any organized rescue effort was underway. Early responders, by multiple accounts, initially operated under the assumption that there were no survivors. This is understandable given the nature of the sinking, but it nearly meant that no one looked closely enough, soon enough, to find Harrison alive. The rescue almost became a body recovery from the very first hour. Harrison himself acknowledged in interviews that he had no training for this kind of scenario. Maritime workers in offshore environments face real risks, and survival training specific to ship sinkings, including the reality of trapped air pockets, is not universally standard. There were systemic gaps, and Harrison paid for some of them, even though he survived.
By day 3, a South African salvage and rescue company called DCN Diving had been contracted to reach the wreck. Their divers went down expecting to find bodies. That was the mission as they understood it. They were doing a recovery operation, not a rescue. One of those divers, Nico van Heerden, was moving through the submerged vessel when a hand came out of the darkness and grabbed him. Harrison Okene, still alive, still breathing in his air pocket, had heard the divers and reached out. The diver's helmet camera captured the moment. That footage later spread widely online, and it remains one of the most striking pieces of video to come out of any maritime rescue in recent memory. You can hear the diver's reaction. You can see Harrison's face, pale and disoriented, emerging from the dark water. The surface team was informed immediately. There was a survivor, but getting him out was not as simple as pulling him up. Harrison had been breathing compressed, pressurized air for nearly 60 hours at depth. His body had absorbed nitrogen at pressure, the same process that makes rapid ascent deadly for divers. If he had been brought straight to the surface, the pressure change would have caused decompression sickness, which can be fatal. The divers had to work carefully. They equipped Harrison with a diving suit and helmet underwater, and the ascent was managed in a controlled, staged process to allow his body to adjust safely. Once on the surface, he was placed in a hyperbaric chamber for decompression treatment, a medically necessary step to eliminate the nitrogen that had built up in his tissues during those 60 hours. He was dehydrated, he was weak, but he was alive. The bodies of all 11 of his crewmates were recovered from the wreck. Harrison Okene was the only survivor.
4 things this story clearly teaches, based entirely on what actually happened. 1. Stillness preserves life in enclosed survival situations. Movement burns oxygen and accelerates CO2 buildup. In any sealed or semi-sealed space with limited air, the instinct to move frantically is often the most dangerous one. 2. Air pockets in sunken vessels are real and survivable. Maritime survival training acknowledges this. Knowing that trapped airspaces can exist in a capsized ship could, in a real emergency, be the difference between someone swimming toward death and staying alive long enough to be found. 3. Never assume no survivors without physical confirmation. This applies to rescue teams and to the systems that guide them. The near assumption that everyone was dead almost cost Harrison his life on a bureaucratic level before any diver even reached the ship. 4. Mental discipline is a survival tool. Harrison's documented accounts describe prayer, deliberate calm, and a conscious choice not to give in to panic. That mental posture, whatever its source, kept him from making the physical mistakes that would have killed him.
1 man, 12 crew members, 1 bathroom break that changed everything. 60 hours later, a diver reached into the black water, and a hand reached back. Harrison Okene survived something that should have been impossible. And the fact that you watched this entire story tells me you appreciate real human survival, not Hollywood versions of it. If that's you, subscribe. We cover stories exactly like this one every single week. 1 click and you won't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.